So everything's about preparation. God does nothing without preparation. Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel, and we are inside my studio where I work and write and paint, everything like that. So in this episode, we are going to continue where I started with God Speaks Art. And I showed you a painting called Siblings. That was the first picture that I was inspired to create once I surrendered my gift to God and said, whatever you'd have me to say, I'll say, because I wanted to use my gifts to express the ideas and thoughts and downloads and impressions that I was getting from God. This piece has to do with relationship and family and positioning, really, in the kingdom of being a son or a daughter of the living God. To create that piece, I used acrylic, I used oil paint, and it was on the canvas surface. So I'm going to demonstrate, not create that piece in particular, but there's some elements there that are fun to use if you're interested in making art. We can explore that together. So today we're also going to explore abstract expressionism. So abstract doesn't always mean like shapes or something that's unrecognizable. When it's abstract expressionism, it should feel more energetic and alive, and there can be some elements of recognizable form. And it really is what you make it and what your creative expressive language is. You can kind of incorporate all of that. But because it's not definitively one thing or another, you can put it in that category of abstraction or abstract expressionism, just to give yourself a little bit of leeway of not having to render something fully the way that it's photographically represented. So let's look into some of the materials we'll be using today. I have oil paint. This is the color Ivory Black. I'll show you that there. We also have acrylic paint. This is titanium white. We have a burnt umber. We have a neutral gray. I'll explain why we get that in a bit. And we have the same colors, but in a different viscosity. And I'll explain what the difference is, but really we're just using it for color mixing and covering ground. And then our tools are an oil brush. We have acrylic brushes. Another interesting part that is considered like a tool to me is, like, depending on the brand of paint that you get, you can also use the nozzle of your paint, or sometimes I just even open straight from the tube and scratch right onto the surface from the tube using the oil paint. So it's really important to become familiar with the materials you have, even down to the packaging, because it could help you explore a bit more in unexpected ways, especially with abstraction and abstract expressionism. That really is like another way of saying mark making, getting familiar with mark making and how you create as an artist. Okay, so we have that. Is there anything else I want to show you all? We need some mediums and help to get these paints moving. I've got my acrylic brush. Another tool I did not introduce yet, but can be very useful, is a palette knife for paint mixing, for moving the paint around across the canvas, making marks. It's so versatile. I actually love to paint primarily with the palette knife, and especially when I'm doing mark making. I'll use the brush when I'm doing like more and more detail, and you'll see, but just don't underestimate the power of and the versatility of your palette knife. I have some medium. This is a medium for oil colors, and this helps basically the oil paint, though it has a lot of oil in it already and can be slick, it helps it to move about the surface and helps to, even if you mix that with a little bit of paint, It will help to create fine lines and details, and it can speed the drying time of your paint. Oil paint is going to take much longer than acrylic to dry, but at least the adding the liquid medium or painting medium inside of it will help to speed the drying time, cut that down a bit. This artist painting medium actually slows the painting, the drying time of the paint. So it will let you get fine details, but just understand, like say if you're doing like eyelashes or hairs or whispers and things, it will allow you to get like a thin, crisp line, but it will slow down the drying time. So you want to use that last in your piece as you're envisioning. Just things to keep in mind when you're creating. This is Sansador, or like what do we call, like a mineral spirits to help clean or clean the brush, and also give like it's a solvent, you know, so you can choose one that has like a very low odor, because the thing that people sometimes don't want to use oil paint for is because it's like has scents, and it could be disturbing to people that are not actually engaged in painting. But when you love oil painting, some people find that they love the smell as well. Um, Not necessarily of the solvent, but just the idea of I'm creating something, and it's part of the environment. So you'll hear people say stuff like that too. We've got our gesso, which is primer. Particularly, gesso is an acrylic base, so this always goes first when you're prepping, and I also use it throughout creating. But oil, always acrylic as the base of your piece, and then oil on top, because oil dries longer, and it needs time to. Oil's like alive, right? So it needs time to move and dry in layers and layers and layers. What else do we have? I do have my oil sticks. This is basically compressed oil paint into stick form. I find that this takes longer to dry than even oil paint straight out of the tube, but I love to use it because my natural inclination is to uh, draw or scribble. Like my hand is very scribble in that. Just that's just like how I like to move. But the great thing about oil sticks is like you can do that kind of drawing and get that really loose hand drawn feel, and then you can go back into it with your brush and blend out any areas, which is what I also like to do. Oh, one last thing, when you are using acrylics, the solvent also can be water. So I like to keep a jar of water, and I use jars because it's better for the environment, and also you can keep them. It doesn't risk leaking anywhere. So, and you can use like your old peanut butter jars or spaghetti jars or whatever you have around the house. So I like to be a bit economical in that way. Especially creating, you're going to end up buying a lot of art supplies, and you don't have to blow the bank on every bit. So, in the same vein, the solvent for the oil should also go in a jar and not plastic. Again, we want to use things that are a bit better for the environment, but keep them separate, and please label them so that you know exactly uh, what it is that's in this jar. Um, I can go on about how to preserve solvents for oil, and how to discard solvents for oil, and how to discard um, acrylic, used acrylic water, but not in this video. But if you want me to do a video on that, you can leave that in the comments, and I'll certainly go into detail about how to take care of your materials. All right, let's get started. We're going to break down a little bit of the steps that I took to create that piece, or how to start any kind of abstract piece, um, and explore into abstract expressionism. All right, so the first thing that I like to do, or that I did, and you heard me mention in that experience, is to grab a surface. So at the time, I grabbed a piece of canvas that I probably had already used and gessoed over, meaning I primed over, and that means that the canvas surface was ready and prepared for paint. So a lot of times if you are using acrylic, this only works with acrylic. If you don't like what you started, you can let that dry and then go back over it with gesso. Some people even need to sand it down depending on like how thick the paint was laid on, but you can definitely reuse your canvas as a part of your creating. Okay, this is canvas paper. You'll see that in the art stores as well. It's a paper, but it's got a little bit of a weft to it or a texture to it. And this is good to hold acrylic and oil paint. The reason why people choose canvas is because it's heavier and you can like layer and layer a lot of paints on top or collage on different surfaces, and it won't make the paper buckle. And if your paint is wet, over time, like you've seen like a napkin or paper towel or something, once it's wet, it starts to kind of bow and buckle. And even with watercolor, like if you don't take the perimeters, it'll start to kind of flex and bend. And for that, like people don't really choose paper all the time if they know that they're going to do that, unless they like that kind of effect. Okay. So that's canvas surface, that's the canvas paper, or you can choose paper, and you can always prime paper. Oil paint absorbs through, soaks through, so you can always prime that first if you like the feeling of paper, but you want to still use oil paint. And then you need some kind of either a palette on your own or palette paper that's very slick and a place to like lay your paints down. So I am going to actually choose today to use a piece of canvas. This is just a small piece. The actual work that I had was about 4 feet. I can't remember the dimensions, but it was quite large. This is like way smaller, but the first thing we're going to do is establish a ground tone. So that means a lot of times people don't want to work on a white surface. White can be a bit intimidating as far as like creating and what to put. So you also want to kind of give yourself a neutral starting point, and you can always add or subtract later. So what we do with that is to take our palette paper, and then we can start with a neutral color like a titanium white. Distribute some of that acrylic. This is going to be all acrylic again. For the base, needs to be acrylic so that it's fast drying. I've got a little bit of Mars black here. And then just to play around, because I'm not sure how gray I want this to get, but I have a neutral gray that's pre-mixed. You can find that at the store as well. And then we want to go for some kinds of like neutral brown. And I like to start out with a burnt umber, a raw umber. And maybe I can zoom in a bit more to show you like what that raw umber looks like. You'll learn these color names as you go. There's also a burnt umber, so don't get that confused. Raw umber is a bit more green and cool. Oop. This is all chalked up full of color. Yep, not coming out. Well, I have burnt umber also in the basics range of this particular brand of paint. And I'll just show you quickly the difference. You see how burnt umber is a bit warm and raw umber is a bit, it seems, I guess, to the natural eye, you say it's darker. It's not necessarily darker, it's just got like less red than that burnt umber here. So that's raw umber, burnt umber. Both very good. I think raw umber leans more towards the greens. And having said that, we'll go into using a little bit of green to create a neutral kind of base. There's also in that family of creating neutrals, a raw sienna is like in the brown family of yellow, like a brownish, goldish brownish yellow. But sometimes when I want to warm up a piece, I did not check these before I started this because I have multiples and it's a mystery like which one is actually open. So that's all right. You'll see me do stuff like that throughout. And we're going to start with our palette knife and really just go in. The palette knives, I love them so much, but they do come in different shapes. You'll hear me fumbling about to find a different shape. They come in different shapes and sizes, and it really just depends on like what you're trying to mix and how you're trying to apply the paint. Because like I said, you can also use this not only to mix paint, but you can apply paint directly to the canvas surface. So I'm going to use like maybe a more rounded one, just to establish, and go ahead in and take that white and invite some of that raw umber, just a very little bit, and a little bit of that neutral gray. We know black and white makes gray, but sometimes you can use the cremonal grays to go ahead and kind of jump ahead and get right into the neutral instead of using up all this space to mix your palette. And I'm happy with where that's going. So I'm not sure that I even need to get into the black, not just yet. I think I'm going to keep with the raw umber. And you don't really want streaks. So scoop up, just kind of like you're having frosting, and scoop up. Now I'll show you the difference. So you're kind of like, oh, that looks white to me still. But when we take it straight out of the tube, you can see a bit more of the difference of what's white from the tube and then what's the neutral you're starting to mix into. And I'm going to go ahead and get a little bit of that green. It's like when you go to the paint store and you're trying to paint your walls and there's like 1,000 shades for you to choose from, and one's like slightly brown or slightly greener, and you're like, look at all these paint swatches. That's why we go home and put the swatches on the wall, because we need to know what it is that we're trying to achieve and what kind of lighting we have in our own house, and if that makes sense for us. So I just finished up my raw umber, and I invited a little bit of that burnt umber into the mix, just to get it a bit more warm. And I like where that's going. If you ever make a small amount of paint and you want to extend it, you can also use an acrylic medium, like maybe a matte medium. Instead of water to kind of spread it out, you can add a little bit of a medium, and that will kind of extend your paint a bit more. Keep in mind though that it does decrease the transparency the more that you add, but in this case a little bit is not going to make much of a difference, and especially for what we're using it for. So that's my very good neutral, and the reason why I wanted this kind of neutral is because I am going to actually add a white on top, and I want to see the difference. So beautiful, beautiful color. So the more you get into your practice, write your color mixes down, like your quantities, like a recipe, because sometimes you find you made a beautiful mix and you don't remember how exactly you did that. And it can be frustrating, or trial and error. So let's go ahead and start distributing this. Now there's a few ways to distribute the paint onto the canvas, and it just depends on what makes you feel free. You can use a brush with acrylic. This is a synthetic acrylic brush. You can use your palette knife to scoop and distribute, or you can even get in there and use your hand. Some people even use like a paper towel or something to distribute. We're just going to establish a ground. That means like change this ground color. So in a few areas, I'm just going to put apply and reapply. Notice I'm like putting down and scraping back up. I just want the canvas to get covered in a thin, even coat. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I just want to get rid of that white primer look. So everything's about preparation. You know, God does nothing without preparation. So even think of it how he created, or the creation story. In the beginning, he still is setting the scene, right? What was that about? So it's not just like a completely blank canvas. It's still a good description of a starting point. A starting point would be that darkness, right? Just to give the listener and the viewer an idea of what was going on. And I'm just going to scrape off any excess. It may seem like we've used a lot, we made a lot and not using it, but don't worry about it. We're going to find a place for that color, or we can bottle it up. This is just establishing the ground tone. I'm not necessarily one of the ones that have to do the borders, but if you love that, then I love that for you. And I'm just going to go ahead with a paper towel and wrap my finger, and in a circular motion start moving around the acrylic. Not too much that the fibers of the paper towel start to wear off on the canvas, but I'm just trying to get establish that ground tone and make it absorb quickly. This is really just the base. It's not because everybody needs to see and love the bottom, although it's an important step. So it's like, definitely don't skip if you don't have to. But we don't want to like invest too much time with thick quantities of paint unless you're going to let it dry and then revisit. But in this example, that was not what I did to create this kind of example. So I'm going to turn the orientation of the canvas and then just start sweeping in, just to show you like there's many ways to approach establishing a ground tone. I happen to think that the palette knife distributes quite well and allows me to cover a large area quickly and then go back in to kind of create some touching up points like that. And I use my hands quite a bit, so let me get my water to clean. I'm going to wrap this back in a paper towel, and that will retain the integrity of the bristles. Let them dry together. Okay. This is relatively on its way to drying, which is a good time for me to reestablish some gesso. Now, gesso usually goes in the beginning, but I'm not opposed to however you're led, however you feel led to create, do your art. So I'm going to use some of the gesso here and just establish some ground shapes, or block out some areas rather, and just use that palette knife again to make marks and just block out, like, where do I want the action to be primarily in this piece. Okay, so this gesso is pretty much dry. I think the reason why I did choose gesso instead of the just typical acrylic paint is because there's so much, there's a nice chalkiness kind of texture and a really nice matte finish that the gesso offers that I really liked for this particular kind of piece. And I'm gonna go in, we're gonna go right in and take our options out. We've got the ivory black oil color. If you ever open the oil paint and there's like all this oil coming out, that is a bit of the medium or like the linseed oil that has not linseed oil is like the binder that's going to help be the vehicle to make sure that the paint moves throughout. So it also comes in a bottle. Like if you ever feel like you have super dry paint or you want to make those crisp lines, you can also use linseed oil. It takes a long time to dry, but it does get you to where you want to be. We've got the ivory black here, and I'll show you what that looks like in the oil color on the palette. I'll go ahead and just bring some of that down. So kind of jumping ahead of myself, but already as I spread out that paint on the surface of the palette paper, I'm getting some nice breaks. And breaks just mean the part where like the paint stops and the surface shows through, which is why I really love to use a palette knife. It's important to keep these bottled up so that it doesn't dry out. It has like the most opportunity to stay intact. And you might find that there's a film after it's dry, depending on how often you break these bad boys out. You might find that there's a film that might need to be kind of broken off or peeled off. You can use your hand, or you can just go ahead and kind of like use your palette knife tip and break below that surface. I'm going to just show you how like that allows you to get that kind of like scribbling kind of effect. And then you can even go ahead with the palette knife and scrape, or you can go ahead and grab one of your oil brushes and blend and move the paint around as you would if it came from the tube. I'm gonna go right in and just start establishing some shape and scribbling, and I'm gonna try to be a little bit true to the original piece, but it's not necessary. I'm just showing an example, and you can see how I'm using the paint. I'm squeezing it very little, like little distribution as I'm actually letting it touch the surface. I don't want a glob to come out. I just want like a little bit. And I've kind of learned, because I love drawing so much, as I mentioned before, like with illustration, I love drawing so much that I even tend to use my paints in a scribble or graphic type of manner. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of establish shape here. And because the faces of that piece were totally blacked out, I'm going to replicate that here. And then go ahead with the other figures on the side. Like that. And then another one. And that just helps me to block out shape and form. Okay. And then let's close that cap and go in with a little bit more detail or a little bit more scribble technique with the oil stick. So now I'm just going to start to kind of establish a little bit more details like cheek and maybe dress detail and some linear work. I remember the suspenders being there. And so this represented the hair. And don't be afraid to get in there and establish some shapes. So part of this other this technique too is to establish the darks from the lights, and then get back in there with my palette knife, and then just start scraping in. I can take away. Let me lay that down on the palette paper. I can start to carve out and really be a bit more definitive about the shapes that I want or what I want to be established. Okay. And then I'll go over here. And you notice I'm just like using the palette knife as like a drawing tool and just establishing a bit more definition, and also taking away a lot of what I laid down. So it's kind of like staining the canvas. But the reason why everything needs to fully dry is to be able to allow me to go in and do that with the ground tone underneath shining or showing through. Okay, so then now that I have that, I want to go right back in. It's just really an exercise or practice of like establishing, adding and subtracting, and building up. Make the hair a bit more defined. Again, it's not going to be exactly the same piece that was created in the beginning, but we are going to use the similar technique of what got us there. And then again with some detail. So again, the abstract part comes into play where it's like things were not really defined, but the expressionism is like the feeling and the rhythm, and then it's okay to have some recognizable parts and decide like which part's going to be the light and which part's going to be the shadow side of your piece, and kind of just go about it that way. Okay, and then from there I have also a cream colored oil stick, which I'm willing to bet I have to take off some of the film as well, which is fine. It's like its own self-preservation. And then in a more thick manner, I'm just gonna start establishing some lights and being a bit more overt about that. So I'm gonna press a bit heavier into the canvas with the lights. And it really is for like texture, and every time it gets a little bit like mucky, I'm going to just wipe it off and continue. You can use paper towel, you can wipe it on the palette paper, and then wipe, and then just scribble and just feel like whatever feels fun for you to establish. And then lastly, I'm going to take the oil brush. This is a hog's hair oil brush. I'm just going to start lightly tap and start feathering out or stippling the details of the hair. Not too much, but just in some areas. Gives a little bit more variety and definition, and trying to give like the illusion of African American or coarse hair. Okay, and I'll do the same thing for her. It's just a play on having like graphic, scribble or scribbling kind of lines, and balance it out with some softness. And the oil paint will allow you to do this because it's still drying. It's still drying. So you haven't fully established anything for good or for like what's permanent. And I can go ahead and drag out some of these areas here, go back in and define it a bit more. That. I'm going to continue on, and again I'll clean my brush in the paint primer, paint solvent, and let's see, I kind of want to like fade that out with my finger over here. And give it a little bit more of a transition into the surface. So I'm using it as an oil paint, but I'm kind of also mimicking a bit of like a charcoal, how a charcoal drawing would be. And there you have it. Very similar, but I'm just taking you back to like the technique. And as this layer dries, you can always go back into it and add detail or fade out what you'd like, but no more acrylic from this point on, because that definitely has dried and is established as the base layer. And anything on now, this is like a full-on, this is going to be an oil painting after that. And there's different ways that oil comes in terms of format, so don't feel stuck to like just, you know, using your brush. There's a lot of ways you can establish continuing using the oil, even if you like a more graphic type of result. Okay, I'm pretty happy with this. I do want to add like one, like maybe a bow or something here. Just to see. I want to like establish some kind of like head dress here. And I'm using my palette knife for that. And then letting that just stay a bit interesting. And there. We did it. Look at my hands. I should have done it before and after, but we established our first style of painting together. This is, you know, what I consider abstract expressionism. It's not quite, I mean, there are clearly three figures here, but they're still done in a very loose, nondescript kind of manner. But we've played around with establishing a ground and using the oil paints to kind of move about the canvas and use them in different ways, as like a scribble drawing, more graphic type of technique, blocking out shapes, using them as light, establishing lights and darks, and then feathering out with a brush, an oil brush, just to get some kind of details or mimic the feeling of like afro hair. Okay, so there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Tune in, continue to journey with me, and have a good time. Have a blessed day, and join me for the next video. Bye.